All right, cool. I don't know how this works. I don't know if you're gonna do an intro or anything.
I didn't even think of doing an intro. I'll do that later if it needs. And here's that intro. So Donna from Psych IRL, which is a great channel. You should check it out. Breaks down psychology, YouTube channels, YouTube creators. Much bigger channel than I am, much smarter than I am. Go check out her channel. Link down here in the description. But Psych IRL agreed to hop on the call with me and ask the questions YouTubers want to know about mainstream media, journalism. The only rules for the conversation were, there were no rules. I didn't know anything she was going to ask me ahead of time. I was like, just hit me. Give me what you want to know. Let's have a discussion about modern journalism and YouTube creators. All right, without further ado, let's get back to the conversation.
Okay, so Alec, a lot of the population feel like that journalists are biased. What are your general thoughts on that kind of thinking?
I think they are biased. I don't think they're immune from the normal prejudice most humans have in any job or career. Do you think most journalists are biased?
Yes. By the definition of your explaining it,
Yeah.
of course that. But do you think journalists have a certain responsibility to be unbiased?
Yes, I think part of the chosen career path would put an obligation on trying to remain objective. And I think journalists, on their good days, try to keep that at the forefront of their ideology, is the objectivity and lack of bias. Do you mean politically or just across the board?
Yeah, a lot of people argue politically,
Yeah.
so maybe we can go with that.
Yeah, I think good. You have a spectrum of journalists, right? Yeah, as you do in any career. And the good ones are better at keeping a lid on their own prejudice and bias, politically, let's say, and being able to communicate objectively, at least get closer to that ideal of objectivity. And the not so good journalists are not as great at it. And I think most readers are able to detect it, right? And that's why you get this vibe of, they seem biased, because if you're reading a collection of articles in a given day or week, you're kind of getting a regression to the mean of just average journalists. And so you're going to get a reasonable amount of latent political bias creeping in. Yeah, I mean, I think it's inevitable. I agree there is an interesting dichotomy where journalism, American journalism in particular, I think likes to parade around the idea that there are some objective truth tellers, immune from the emotional magnetism of being Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative. And in some ways they do a disservice to themselves by placing themselves so high on a pedestal, and therefore the audience expectation is generally never met.
Right.
Is that make sense?
Yeah. So with that, is there still, though, a certain responsibility for them? Because you said naturally, as human beings, we have bias.
Yeah.
But is there a certain responsibility journalists have to have? And with the current state of journalism and the business model, do you think that's being neglected?
Yes. Certainly, the average journalist's job has a certain unexpressed priority to lean into specific narratives. So if you're at the Huffington Post, for instance, you implicitly understand between your coworkers and your bosses, I'm using Huffington Post as an example, that your main bread and butter is probably going to be women between the ages of 18 and 35, and they're going to be more passionate about environmental, social issues, gender issues. And therefore, you're going to want to focus on those, one, because that's what your audience is more interested in, and you want views, you want readership, you want to impress your boss, you want to impress your colleagues. But two, because you know your audience is mainly female, but let's say 25 female and interested in social issues, you're going to naturally, without anybody telling you, after a couple weeks or months on the job, want to write in a way that appeals to your audience and makes them like you, and makes them like what you're writing, just because nobody likes criticism. Nobody wants to get the Twitter DMs or the Twitter flack. Nobody wants to get dislikes. And so the model that you're working in as a journalist incentivizes certain tendencies. To lean into those tendencies. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So as a consumer, because of that, because you know that business model and what they're doing, should I trust journalists and mainstream media?
I think it was George Bush Sr., the first George Bush, who said trust but verify.
Right.
I think that's probably the best mode of operation when reading any sort of journalism, is to trust but verify. And if you read it from one specific source or one outlet and you hear it nowhere else, trust but verify. Well, are other outlets reporting this? What are they saying? And then often my experience in newsrooms and just knowing people at all corners of mainstream media is that the way journalists look at how journalists consume media is they very much make a distinction between who's writing the article and less about what outlet is publishing it. So everybody has writers oh, I like this writer at Huffington Post, this writer at the Daily Beast, this one at the Wall Street Journal, this one at the New York Times. Mm-hmm. And I like this writer at Fox News. They're great. But then they pay no attention to the actual media outlets. It's like, oh yeah, of course Fox News on the whole is going to lean conservative. New York Times, those liberal hacks.
Right.
But journalists internally pay almost no attention to that. They're like, oh, did Stephen write this? Or did Matt Dominic write that? Or did Ben Smith write this? Or Anne Helen who's these exact people? And then they'll follow them on their career paths. Particularly because journalists within the media journalism career makes no bones about hiring somebody from Fox News to New York Times, or New York Times to Fox News, or to Huffington Post, Breitbart to... There's very little consideration from oh, you came from a conservative the actual media companies are just looking at, well, what articles have you written? Do we like those?
Right. I would have thought that a more conservative media company would stick with conservative writers and more liberal vice versa, you know?
By and large they do. So you get that mean, that regression to the mean. So if you were to just cut a piece of the Fox News pie or the piece of the Huffington Post pie, your middle journalist employee is going to lean towards liberal women in Huffington Post or conservative men working at Fox News.
Right.
And you can carve a very comfortable living kind of doing that. But the good ones, you read the New York Times, and this guy is actually taking a more suspicious eye towards global warming. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. Or you read Fox News, and they're like, this one writer at Fox News says Donald Trump doesn't know what he's talking about. And you go, oh, that's interesting.
Right.
So it's just much more, it requires a level of critical consumption when it comes to journalism that, that just requires more of the reader often.
Got it. So you yourself, do you think something needs to change, or do you think it's all right just the way it is?
I think the biggest problem, change in what way to make people feel like
you can trust them, or the biases versus the business model,
Right. To use a tangent that I think compares on some level, a lot of directors and writers and filmmakers often talk about HBO as the holy grail to be able to produce a show for.
Yeah.
And they cite that often with the corollary that I'm able to take more creative risks at HBO because HBO is subscription driven. They can greenlight things that a small core audience is really passionate about and will watch and continue to pay their monthly subscription. Over, I don't want to, primetime show on NBC or CBS, beholden to advertisers. They're always wanting to cut stuff. They always want to have notes. Does that make sense? And the same thing often applies to serious journalism outlets, in that the New York Times, for instance, as it's become larger in its subscriptions, its digital subscriptions, I think it's been able to take bigger risks in terms of reporting a wide variety of views and less dependent on picking a specific demographic or appealing to a broad, liberal cast of characters, because that's what they're dependent on their advertisers for. So in some ways, the consumer gets what it wants. If the consumer wants a higher quality of journalism, they almost have to pay for it on a subscription level, because that allows a media company freedom to take bigger risks. Just like an HBO is always going to take bigger risks on shows than NBC is. The New York Times, with the security of subscriptions, is going to be able to take bigger risks than BuzzFeed News is, because they're dependent on advertisers.
Interesting. So something I found that was interesting, I thought, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Fairness Doctrine.
Yes.
So...
Very familiar. It's gone.
What happened?
Fairness Doctrine's basically been repealed.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So it was, it was introduced in 1949, and it required broadcast licenses to both present opposing views when it came to controversial topics. And obviously in 1987 that was repealed. So, and the other side of the argument was that because opposing both views would stifle business. Do you think something like that should be introduced again?
I think it's an interesting model and debate. I don't know whether it should be introduced or not. I don't know if the quality of information in the 50s or 60s or 70s was any better or worse than it is today. You just have more avenues for information, and therefore it can be harder to perhaps suss out what is quality information or poor information. But I think the quality information and the bad information is still there.
Right. Well, Facebook and YouTube kind of do that, don't they? Well, I don't agree really with what they do, but they, highlight authority news sources on their sites.
Yeah, they do. They don't maybe say it as publicly, but I can tell you 100% that, like, Philip DeFranco on YouTube is not considered an authoritative source. The way YouTube looks at authoritative voices is seeing if they're a media publisher, if they have a website, if they're publishing articles. They'll then link that website to the YouTube channel and have it as a feedback loop. So if Vox publishes an article on COVID-19, they'll be like, oh, does Vox have a YouTube channel? Oh, it does. We'll raise up whatever Vox is. And because Philip DeFranco doesn't have this kind of Google News article element, they just don't recognize Philip DeFranco as an authoritative voice, even though I'm sure many viewers would say Philip DeFranco seems much more reasonable and middle ground than any media publisher putting stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
Just to close out the Fairness Doctrine, which is interesting to me, is that part of the issue with the Fairness Doctrine was when television was an early medium, there was only a few television channels. It was kind of CBS, NBC. I don't think ABC even existed at that point.
Yeah.
And there was an argument that, since there's only 5 channels, we don't want them to all get dominated by one interest group or one opinion, because nobody has any other alternative information. So you got 3 or 4 channels. So we're going to force them to carry both sides of the issue. And in the 80s, by that point, when cable television rose and there's now 100, 200, 300 channels, the argument was made, well, now consumers have a wide variety of informational salads to munch on, and therefore this is no longer needed. They can go look and watch MSNBC. They can go watch Fox News. They can go watch NBC News. They can go watch CNBC. They can go watch... Does that make sense? And that was the argument, both to have it originally and then to repeal it.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So going with that, and moving into internet news, like you said, Philip DeFranco, and having platforms like Facebook and, YouTube only highlighting authoritative news sources, doesn't that go against what you just said?
Yeah, I think YouTube and Facebook... I guess I'll speak a little bit on YouTube. I think YouTube has become a kind of moral arbiter of what is authoritative or real news.
Right.
And that seems like a very interesting and dangerous power to give YouTube. Now, I think it benefits traditional mainstream media because they have the ear of YouTube, and they're often the funds for YouTube. They're pouring money in, they're promoting YouTube. And so, New York Times, Washington Post, Fox, doesn't name your melange of mainstream media, can whisper in YouTube's ear and be like, well, don't be publishing that fake news stuff. You should be promoting our stuff. And if you don't promote our stuff, we're going to run articles about how you're not upholding your civic duty to promote real information. You're letting fake news travel around your website. Does that make sense? They box YouTube into a corner where YouTube is scared to allow an entirely libertarian, laissez-faire landscape because they don't want mainstream media to continually write articles about how they're allowing fake news or allowing conspiracies.
Right. So, is that what it comes down to? Who has the most dollars to become an authoritative figure? So Philip DeFranco essentially can never, fit that part in the algorithm that makes him that.
You make an interesting point. I don't know how Philip DeFranco would have to do to become an authoritative voice.
Right.
My guess is from speaking with YouTube employees that will go unnamed, what he would have to do, and I think what he is doing, if people are curious, like what's this Rogue Rocket, whatever it's called, his website, he had that big Patreon, he's raising money for this news company, and you don't really hear anything about it. My guess is, if he's able to establish what the public considers a legitimate news organization, you go to the website, you read articles, they have a bunch of people and bylines and a masthead.
Yeah.
He could take that to YouTube and be like, listen, it's not Philip DeFranco anymore, it's Rogue Rocket. Rogue Rocket is the authoritative voice. And Philip DeFranco, the character, this Philip DeFranco show is part of the Rogue Rocket media network. Does that make sense? Just like Tucker Carlson is an authoritative voice on YouTube because he falls under the Fox News banner of mainstream media. There was just Tucker Carlson on his own, on Tucker Carlson's YouTube channel. He would not be an authoritative voice. If that makes sense.
Right. So as an online creator, I think it's my responsibility to ask this question.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Hit me.
Everyone always says, across the board, online creators always say, there is, it's always journalists, mainstream media versus YouTubers. Is there some truth to that? Do journalists always go after YouTubers like PewDiePie?
That's a good question. I'm going to reset this because it's about to end.
Okay.
To answer your question, do journalists go after YouTubers? Is that does it feel like they're targeting YouTube?
Yeah.
Help me dig down what you're really asking here.
So, PewDiePie, to be specific, always seems to feel like he's being attacked for every little thing that he does.
Right.
Whether that be giving a donation or, making a joke.
Right. Is he attacked? Yes. I think he is an easy story.
Okay.
He has a big audience. He has big name recognition. If you can find some sort of narrative, no different than Logan Paul or Jake Paul or whoever the celebrity du jour is, Kim Kardashian, Justin Bieber, any individual that has enough of an intrinsic audience, an organic audience that you can then carve a narrative about and write a story is going to be appealing just on the base instincts of journalism, which is like, oh, I want clicks and views and I want to have impact. And my way of having impact is to construct or tell this narrative that, I'll be generous and say, the Wall Street presumed to be true, that they sincerely somehow felt that PewDiePie was an alt-right Nazi and they were going to report this narrative. And it makes sense for them to do that purely because people know who they're talking about by and large when they say PewDiePie. It doesn't serve New York Times, Wall Street Journal's interests to talk about some small YouTuber that may be doing just the same, if not worse, than PewDiePie. Mm-hmm. But nobody's going to read it.
Yeah. So you think it's more about clicks rather than going after YouTubers in general?
Yeah, I think when you're attacked, it's very easy to feel like it's personal. Just like the few times I've got my bike stolen or your backpack stolen, I feel like everybody's had an experience where they had something stolen from them. And I'll speak for myself. It always feels personal. It's always like, oh, why did this happen to me? Like, why did they do this to me? In reality, people getting robbed and stolen all the time, and it just feels personal. And so your sense of it is outsized proportionally. But as much as PewDiePie feels like he's getting attacked, I'm sure Justin Bieber or Jake Paul, they all feel like they're getting attacked. They all feel like they're getting mistreated disproportionately to every other celebrity. But in reality, it's not them. They're simply their caricature of celebrity that draws the attraction.
Yeah. So there isn't mainstream media doesn't feel a threat from online creators.
No, I mean, mainstream media is very decentralized, at least in the United States. Like, there's no, whether it's CNN or BuzzFeed or Vice, name your company, there's nobody at the top saying these YouTubers are taking views from us or they're getting to these stories faster, we need to take them down. There's no directive. And on the individual level, nobody's sitting in these newsrooms talking about like, oh, can you believe PewDiePie did this? Most journalists are kind of antiquated in their media consumption. Most newsrooms I've been in don't really watch YouTube. They watch Netflix maybe and browse around Twitter. So most sorry, no, what were we gonna say?
So then, what would be the purpose then of them being an authoritative figure on these sites if they don't feel threatened by online creators?
I mean, it's part speculation. My feeling of it, having worked at a lot of these companies, is that it's less to do with YouTubers are threatening us, and more to do with the fact that YouTube is now the second largest search engine in the world. Many big companies pour millions of advertising dollars into this. We want a piece of the pie. And the way we can get a piece of the pie is by going to YouTube and being like, you should give us a bigger cut because we offer a specific value to your platform. We offer the value of authoritative voices. Get all these conspiracies and all these people in their bedrooms. That's great. They can go do whatever they want. But we're the real grown-ups in the room. We'll bring our content to your platform, and we want a little higher CPM. We want special privileges.
Right.
That's how they view it.
Okay.
Does that feel satisfactory? Or what leaves you? Does that just bring up more questions than it answers?
Conspiracy theory. I mean, I don't support or back anything Alex Jones says, but it was kind of suspicious that he was banned from almost every single, like, on social media. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of, I don't feel like mainstream media is threatened by Alex Jones, but, you know, it's still a little bit suspicious. Why do you think that happened?
Why do I think Alex Jones got kicked off by Twitter
Almost,
and YouTube?
yeah, at the same time as well.
Panic and herd mentality.
Okay.
What I mean by that is you get into these newsrooms and these mainstream media apparatuses and you realize it's a little bit like Wizard of Oz, just an old man behind the behind the curtain. And nobody really has any great insight over any other company or any other platform. And so if a bunch of journalists or media companies hop on the anti-Alex Jones bandwagon because it's good for views, you know, he was popular for a minute, he was supporting Trump, he was getting a lot of views, oh, this is interesting, let's dig into it. The New York Times writes an article, does pretty well in traffic. Then NBC and CNN and Fox News all go, oh, that's interesting. There seems to be an appetite for Alex Jones content. Well, what's an easier narrative? Alex Jones is smart or Alex Jones is an idiot? Alex Jones is an idiot is an easier narrative. I'm a lazy journalist. Forget it. I'm just going to go with that narrative. So you find some clips on his InfoWars site or on YouTube, him saying stupid stuff. You string it together, you put it out there, and you get more clicks. And the other journalists are looking around and they're going, oh, I should do this too. And you start to have a dogpile effect. And then once you've kind of scavenged Alex Jones himself as a piece of content, well, what's the secondary part of that you can write a story about? Okay, well, Alex Jones is dumb and bad and spreading misinformation. We've already covered that. But who's allowing him to spread misinformation? Oh, the big evil Facebooks and Twitters.
Right.
Twitter, why are you allowing Alex Jones to spread misinformation? Facebook, why are you allowing him to spread misinformation?
Right.
And first you see Facebook or Twitter go, well, it's just one person in the crowd. I don't know. They don't really care. And then enough journalists and media companies keep asking one platform, let's say Twitter, and Twitter finally goes, okay, you're right, we should ban him. He's spreading too much stuff. It's just not worth the public PR flack. And once Twitter collapses, media companies go right, oh, this is interesting. This is a great story. So now we have Twitter bans Alex Jones. Straight to Facebook. Well, Twitter has banned Alex Jones. Why haven't you? Do you not support the same things Twitter supports? Facebook starts to panic. They ban Alex Jones. Journalists go to YouTube. Facebook and Twitter have banned Alex Jones. Why haven't you? And it just becomes a herd mentality, hive mind dogpile.
Got it.
Rather than any sort of concentrated effort. Does that make sense? It's much more just a domino effect of the tidal wave of trying to get some sort of interesting story for the day.
Right.
Do you buy that explanation, or are you still left suspicious?
What you're saying makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But I just feel like, and maybe this is from my bias as an online creator.
Yeah, no, talk to me.
It does feel a little bit like, it always feels like mainstream media versus YouTubers. Why aren't YouTubers getting ads like Jimmy Kimmel? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. The reason why... the reason why is because often Jimmy Kimmel, when you think of Jimmy Kimmel, you just see the person, but behind Jimmy Kimmel stands an army of PAs and editors and writers and a massive corporation. And Jimmy Kimmel doesn't phone up YouTube. the senior vice president of CBS or ABC or whatever he's on phones up YouTube, sends an email to their lawyer and say, we should be getting paid a higher ad premium. And YouTube goes, okay, because it's not worth the headache, because they know, often because these are big companies, so let's say CBS, right? Or what owns Jimmy Kimmel? ABC owns Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah.
So Jimmy Kimmel, once again, I'm not saying this is the case, but I think what happens is this all occurs implicitly, which is that YouTube recognizes if we curry favor with Jimmy Kimmel and the senior vice president of ABC, and Jimmy Kimmel's show is doing well and they're getting paid a little more ad dollars on YouTube, they might be a little more reluctant to go after us with their ABC News arm. So next time YouTube messes up, maybe ABC News will be a little softer, because that senior vice president will be like, hey, don't rock the boat too much. We're making good money on YouTube with Jimmy Kimmel and our other shows. So does that make sense? And they're playing a political calculus, a money calculus.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure YouTube has the data on this as well, though. If they do have the data, well, yeah, they do have the data on this, but can't YouTube see that if they were to add, and it's not even about giving Jimmy Kimmel a higher premium or ads, but why do they have to go and demonetize, and I don't know if you can answer this honestly, but why do they have to demonetize someone like Casey Neistat for him talking about the same subject as Jimmy Kimmel?
Man, can you give me a specific example? Are you talking about something specific? Like, what did Casey Neistat get demonetized for?
So I forgot the exact situation.
Yeah.
But Jimmy Kimmel and Casey Neistat were talking about a tragedy that was happening on the news.
Right.
And so there were ads on the Kimmel video, but not Casey Neistat's.
Right. So behind the scenes, deals are made. Like, once again, to give an example that somewhat works analogously, not even a word, somewhat parallel, congruent to what you're saying, is that I think everybody's seen any YouTube creator who mentions coronavirus, COVID-19 in their headline and their title, talking about in the video, yellow, demonetized. Right? And I think most creators, correct me if I'm wrong, are like, well, it's because YouTube doesn't want to feel like they're profiting off of some sort of major tragedy, so they're just going to demonetize everything.
Right.
They make an exception for media companies to talk about COVID-19. So Vox and Yahoo and Huffington Post all can get greenlit on anything they say about COVID-19 or coronavirus, because those big companies have gone around behind the scenes and said, YouTube, we're making lots of content on coronavirus. We're an authoritative voice. Stop demonetizing us. And YouTube goes, oh, yeah, you're right. And the same occurs with Jimmy Kimmel. So Jimmy Kimmel has just been whitelisted because they either trust the apparatus of Jimmy Kimmel to remain family friendly, that they don't really have to worry about it, and they because independent creators often don't have an apparatus.
Right.
I think the risk volatility, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing. Like, I think it's good that independent creators will talk about wide-ranging topics and share their legitimate opinion about it. But that creates a risk volatility graph that YouTube is like, well, we're going to err on the side of caution and just keep those things demonetized for independent creators and review them on a case-by-case basis. Whereas with big media companies or media shows, we're going to do the opposite, keep it whitelisted, monetized, and only flag it if it seems egregious or somebody brings it to our attention.
Right, makes sense.
Because that risk factor is low. And CBS or ABC News has been able to convince YouTube the risk factor is low. Trust us,
Right. I was going to ask something, but I don't think you can answer this.
Go for it.
It's more about YouTube as a platform. Because I was going to ask something like, once you get a certain number of like Casey Neistat.
Yeah.
Sure, he's an independent creator, but he's proven time and time again that whatever he says is not advertiser friendly. So Sorry, that didn't make sense. Not like demonetizable or whatever. So, yeah, I doubt you can answer this. Like, is there a certain level of things you have to prove to become less demonetized, I guess? Because you're not YouTube, so I'm like,
So
maybe.
my
Yeah.
understanding from talking with people that work at YouTube is that yes, and they make almost quarterly, operate on like a 3-month rolling revision.
Okay.
And they, for like Google's preferred partner program, things like this that like PewDiePie got kicked out of or Logan Paul got kicked out of, where you get a higher CPM or you're shown more often. That the way they do it is they kind of pick whatever the top 5% of creators are in that 3 months. They look, okay, is this family friendly? Okay, we're going to whitelist them for 3 months. And then at the next 3 months, we're going to review it. Are they still at the top? Are they still family friendly? If not, we're going to take them off. And so I would actually not be surprised if during a period when Casey Neistat was vlogging, he was getting special treatment. He had proven that he was making family-friendly content. He was in Google's preferred partner program. He was getting a higher CPM. That's why he was in trending all the time. And then when he deaccelerated, stopped making videos, a downward trajectory, which is fine. But then that slot was then filled by some new creator. And so because of that, because of Casey stopped uploading videos, that had a slowing effect on everything. They took him off of Google Preferred and went into somebody else. And when he was no longer on Google Preferred, that triggered other things like just automatic algorithms in the background where now they're going to demonetize it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And they have, they never talk about these things publicly, but every channel has these kind of encoded ratings based on profanity and subject matter. And you can slowly raise that rating over time, whether that's by suddenly making more and more family-friendly content or requesting reviews of videos that were demonetized and turn out to be monetizable. YouTube's filing that all away. I know that. And they're making a calculus decision. So if you make 5 videos and they all get demonetized, whoa.
What is that?
That is my camera freaking out on.
Oh, really?
Focus. There we go. It lost focus there for a second. I'll start again. If you make 5 videos on YouTube and they're just immediately demonetized to begin with, and you request review, and YouTube watches those 5 videos and they find, oh, you're right, they were all family friendly. These reviews, he was right to request a review. He or she was right. Green. That 6th video you uploaded is more likely to be automatically monetizable. Because the algorithm is making a distinction. Oh, this channel is more trustworthy. Oh, it has a certain percentage of being family friendly. We're going to give it the green light until further review.
Right.
Conversely, if you upload 5 videos, request reviews, and YouTube goes, no, this is not family friendly, it's staying demonetized, they are more likely to distrust is not the right word, but automatically place that channel in a category that is not monetizable. And this is all happening in real time, constantly by just algorithm. This is not like a human is sitting there going like, this channel in this bucket. The machine is doing that all the time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
That's my understanding of, once again, I'm having to piece this together from my conversations with people that work at YouTube. But it's that, and I think you and I have discussed a little bit, these bigger channels have self-certification now.
Yeah.
Right, so these channels can now, YouTube's handing them the keys to be like, hey, we trust you. You're going to monetize it, demonetize it. So, and some bigger YouTube channels just have that. I'm sure PewDiePie has that. I'm sure H3H3 has that. I'm sure Logan Paul has that.
Yeah. Is that... I think you've answered all my questions.
Did any of that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And It's more about, the business side rather than going after the creators themselves. Basically, what you're saying.
Does that
my understanding.
Yeah, does that surprise you?
Yes and no. Yeah, I mean, no in that it makes sense. As a collective, like as YouTubers as a collective,
Yeah.
I feel like we've already discussed this, but the authoritative thing kind of counters it for me.
What do you mean? Wait. Unpack that.
As in, if they were, because of the Fairness Doctrine, if they were being so libertarian about this whole thing, why would they need that authoritative voice or whatever? Sure, it's because of the money, stuff like that, but again, it counters that libertarian view, in my mind.
That counters YouTube's libertarian view, or the media company's libertarian view?
The media company's libertarian view.
So, I think media companies are motivated by money, and they will use any leverage point they have. And if they and if Fox News and CNN can sell Facebook on the idea that they're an authoritative voice, regardless if they are or not, they're going to try to do it.
Right.
Because that's just a leverage point in which they can try to extract more value from Facebook.
Right. But, yeah, that makes sense.
And in media companies, there's like the individual journalists that are kind of selecting stories at random, but behind every media company is many business managers and advertising executives that are looking at the bottom line and going, how can we make this more money? How can we make more money per viewer, per audience member, per subscription? And they're just ruthless.
Right.
And if that means selling YouTube or Facebook on the concept of authoritative voices, they will try to do so. And if that means stamping out independent creators as collateral damage, they don't care, because their job is business manager of New York Times to make the New York Times more money. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's nothing personal. YouTuber or PewDiePie or Alex. Just.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
And it maybe it's kind of depressing. I don't know. But that's my understanding, or what I've seen to have witnessed, is just media companies acting like any other corporation, like any other.
Do you think because of that, because of that fact, the population and individuals as a collective will move away from mainstream media and more into alternatives, like, and again, online creators? Or do you think they will always have that hold on the population as a whole?
Help me understand what you're asking. Like, give me an example.
Basically, because people feel like they're biased, and maybe they don't because, I'm in my online creator bubble. Do you think the population as a whole is moving towards more getting their news from alternative sources like Philip DeFranco?
Yes and no. I take a maybe more philosophical, big picture outlook to this, in that it seems like when you talk about the public, right? It seems to come and go in waves. So why did cable news skyrocket in the 80s and 90s? It's because a younger generation was sick of their mom and dad reading the Wall Street Journal and The Economist, and they could find this interesting, op-ed-y, kind of entertaining cable news that was taking a little more interesting approach relative to a very dry Wall Street Journal text.
Yeah.
And so you saw a younger generation gravitate towards consuming news content on cable news in the 80s and 90s. And then that became the kind of status quo, and now you're seeing another generation go, that's boring, that's hacky, that doesn't seem very truthful or they seem biased, we're going to go online. And so then the next generation consumes their news on the internet. And it's less of like kids 10-year-old kid and 80-year-old kid all suddenly consuming news on the internet. It's each generation finds the new medium that they feel like is offering them the most insightful information.
Yeah.
So you have the older generation still watching cable news and the younger generation watching YouTube. What will the generation 30 years from now be? I have no idea. My guess is
TikTok.
It'll be... Right. It could be what... Exactly, though. It could be TikTok or whatever platform seems different enough and more honest than the ones our parents watched and their parents watched.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it just seems like a revolving door in my mind of... But... I mean, where do you, when you want to read something, how do you get your news?
Well, okay, this is embarrassing.
No. Don't be embarrassed.
Well, okay, so something usually pops up on Twitter or something like that.
Yep.
You know, something trends on Facebook or any social media thing, and then I look into it.
Okay.
So yes, mainstream media, online though.
Yep.
Articles, and then I'll go into what Philip DeFranco might say.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my cycle, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I think that's the right approach. That's what I would do. And
Okay.
I mean, you and I had the same process. And I think it's less a product... The fact that you and I have the same process is more a fact of our generational similarity.
Yeah.
Which is that we see something on Twitter, we Google it. Mm-hmm. There's a couple mainstream media outlets that have headlines about it. We read those. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Okay, that's interesting. Then you go on YouTube. What does Philip DeFranco have to say about it? Okay, that's interesting. And then we put our barometer somewhere on whether we agree, disagree, how we feel about it, and then move on. I mean, I'll speak from it. Yeah. That's how I do it.
Yeah, same.
So I don't think there's, like, I think that's the more common way of consuming news than maybe you were aware.
Right. I don't know. It seems so millennial to me. So I'm like, people don't do this right, or this isn't the right way to do it, right?
Okay. See, well, that's kind of an interesting side note, which is that I think mainstream media companies have done a really good job of convincing someone like you that the right way to consume news is to read the New York Times. The right way to consume news is to watch Fox News, right? Like, don't bother with all this other nonsense. Mm-hmm. And this is a good magic spell they put on people to feel guilty about watching Philip DeFranco Googling around, because by you doing that, it takes away advertising dollars from BuzzFeed or subscriptions from New York Times, right? So they're vested interest in convincing you there is a right way to consume news and a wrong way to consume news.
Yeah.
Was that informative at all?
It was. Yeah, it really was. You answered all my questions. You look like you're not convinced.
No, I worry. Between you and I worry because when I have these conversations with people, I feel like I lay it out very rationally and kind of like cold.
Uh-huh.
And your reaction is the common one just among people I talk to in real life, which is like, yeah, it makes sense. And it's just like, so, not depressing, but just kind of like, there is no magic. It's just people incentivized by money and clicks and your general human base. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And
I can't even argue against it. That's why I'm like, yeah. because it really does make sense. I'm not trying to be like, oh yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, no, I don't want you to like. I mean,
Yeah.
if you think something's stupid, tell me. Be like, nah, that's.
Yeah.
But it's very much, from my observations, just, there's that quote, I forget who says it, but it's like, never attribute to malice, which you can attribute to kind of ignorance or just laziness. Do you mean? Like, is the person evil or are they lazy? And my observation is that the actions and the consequences of mainstream media making decisions and doing things is more to do with the collective laziness and basic motivations about money than any sort of calculated ideas about we gotta attack YouTubers or we gotta do this or we need to push Alex Jones off the platform because we really actually care about truth.
Yeah.
Do you mean, like, there was never anybody that Jeff Zucker of CNN never said to CNN, get Alex Jones off platforms, he's doing a disservice to society, this is actually might make a good front that we're protecting society by doing that, but my guess is Alex Jones was removed off of these platforms more by just collateral accident of so many media companies swirling around the story and trying to make something interesting happen that they pushed him out.
Right. Actually, wait, now that I think about it, okay, so I'm not very familiar with this subject.
Yeah.
But I'm sure media companies lobby for certain things, right?
Yeah, well, I mean...
So that's kind of a motivation that doesn't really... Well, it does revolve around money, but it also influences law. So if we go to, like, YouTube and Facebook, for example, I'm sure they lobby for being able to collect data, being able to abuse users' privacy rights, things like that.
Well, let me try to elucidate a little more specifically what you're asking. When you say they lobby, who's, like, the mainstream media, like New York Times is lobbying for, like, just rephrase it a little bit. What are you asking?
Because I'm not familiar with, like, what they would lobby for, but I'm sure they do. So I'm just saying, isn't that a motivation for more unfair practices or more political, like, they'd report more liberal or more conservative? Because they want to lobby,
In terms of lobbying, I mean, I don't think even our biggest news institutions like CNN and New York Times have any comparable size of a lobby arm as Facebook does or Google.
Okay.
They're not at Congress, really. Hey, we need to do this or that. Once again, if anything, the screams and moans that mainstream media make are due to their own self-interest on some level. And so one can get cynical because the individual journalist investigating Facebook for how much data it collects on users may be an interesting story and beneficial to the public. And they bring this big story and, wow, Facebook's collecting all this data and you're making all this money off of where you're traveling to and what all your interests are. And, like, you and I can gain some value from that. Like, oh, should Facebook be collecting all that data? That's interesting.
Right.
But there's a second element to that, which is the business side of the New York Times recognizes, oh, we just ran a scathing report on Facebook collecting all that data. You're right. They shouldn't be collecting all that data. You shouldn't use Facebook to get your news. You should go to the New York Times to get your news, and we'll collect your data. Yeah. And then the New York Times can sell it.
Yeah.
So any media company also has an incentive to try to discourage their audiences from consuming their content off platform.
Right.
Because you lose a little bit of the control of your audience, you lose a little bit of the money, you just lose information. And so if you can convince somebody who wants to know what's going on in the world today to just go straight to NewYorkTimes.com or log on to Facebook and see if a New York Times article pops up, the New York Times is incentivized to get you to feel guilty
Yeah.
by going to Facebook over NewYorkTimes.com.
Mm-hmm. Didn't the... Man, I'm blanking on something to do with Article 13, or maybe a subset of Article 13. They didn't like when Facebook kind of like showed the headline. I'm not sure if I'm recalling this correctly or if you're familiar with this.
This may be out of my wheelhouse. Article 13 of... Is this the EU thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, yeah. It was something like, they didn't like the fact that Facebook was displaying headlines and thumbnails because people would just scroll, read the headline, and move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they wanted payment from Facebook because their argument was that that they were taking dollars from them because of that.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
I mean, that's also another reason why media companies would lobby against platforms like Facebook or YouTube.
Yeah. Do you think, though, interesting, like, do you think the media companies make a legitimate argument there that Facebook is monetizing content that's not theirs by just running the thumbnail and headline, getting people to stay on Facebook's platform and never bothering to click onto the actual site that made or wrote the report?
Well, to me, it's the consumer's fault for not clicking. I mean, it's not right. It's not Facebook's fault that the consumers aren't clicking the articles and they're just reading the headlines. If they truly wanted to know more, they would click. How else would New York Times or any other journalist advertise their articles then? It, in theory, should benefit both parties.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the argument Facebook makes, which is that we're giving you... I think the argument Facebook makes is that, well, we're giving you, Wall Street Journal, free advertising. And the argument Wall Street Journal makes is, well, wait, we're giving you, Facebook, free content.
Yeah.
And which of those is the truth? Maybe they're both true. Who knows? But that's, I think, how each side sees it.
Right. Oh, well. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to care in the grand scheme of things. You know, they seem just opaque.
Yeah.
Large media companies. Yeah. Okay, well, cool. Thanks, Donna.
Good. It was fun. I learned a lot.
Did you really?
Yeah.
It wasn't boring.
No, it's interesting because it kind of applies to myself, I guess. And it's really fun. Well, not fun, but it's interesting to see actual laws being implemented into the digital space, like COPPA, for instance.
Right.
And how, because there are mainstream media laws that aren't applied to the internet laws yet, or internet world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to see those being implemented now.
Speaking of COPPA, let me tell you an anecdote that sums up how media companies view YouTube.
Okay.
I was working at a large media company that will go unnamed. And one division of it, there's a bunch of YouTube channels that this media company had. And one division asked me, how come all our videos get demonetized? What's going on? Can we speak to one of the YouTube reps? And I went and took a look at their channel, and then their back end, their creator studio. And I said, by chance, are you designating all your videos as for kids? And they were like, yeah, isn't that what we're supposed to do? Like, it's family friendly. And I was like, No. When you designate it as for kids only, that falls under the COPPA law, and they're going to demonetize you immediately.
Yeah.
And they didn't understand even the basic principles of COPPA, how YouTube was monetizing or demonetizing things. And this was some senior people working in a media company. And the fact that they were just uploading videos as if they were Ryan's Toys reviews. And these are serious journalism pieces, right? And they, we don't know what's going on. I think is indicative largely of how little mainstream media both pays attention to and or understands the ecosystem of YouTube.
That's funny. Because, I mean, that's a mainstream media law that's been newly implemented into YouTube. So that to me that's funny.
Right, yeah. Well, I think it's very revealing, because I think any creator, you and I, would recognize why would that be so foolish to click the button that this video is for kids under 13, or because you're automatically going to get demonetized. They just rolled it out. And the fact that you have these serious people in media not understanding that, I think shows you the reality of the situation.
Yeah. No one actually knows what they're doing.
Yeah, it's just a gap between the people that got into journalism by and large in 2020 got into it by consuming journalism that wasn't made on the internet by and large. I mean, you got some overlap, but a lot of people that have been in journalism for 10 or 20 years, right, they got inspired to go into journalism because they were watching Tom Brokaw or reading the newspaper. And they still imagine that's how journalism is practiced, and to have to think about YouTube or even consume media on YouTube doesn't occur to them. It's just another place to put content.
You're gonna have a hell of a video to edit, or if this is gonna be so long.
Yeah, I might just keep it long. You're like, hell with it. If anybody's interested in watching this, they can watch it.
Yeah.
Cool. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Hopefully you found it interesting. Listen at 2 times speed. It's okay. I watch every video at 2 times speed. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, PsychRL, for doing that. I had a great conversation. See you guys soon. Subscribe to PsychRL. Like I said, she is a great YouTube creator. Super smart. 2 thumbs up for me. See you guys soon. Bye, guys.